Hi everyone, welcome to Write by Mia. I'm Mia, and on today's Writer's Library, I will not be sharing one, but my 5 top books from the months of May and June. I know it's been a while since I've posted and talked with you guys, but it's been a great time for me working on another revision of the novel, which I will actually be posting about soon. So let's go ahead and get started with our 5. Number 1, Notes on Grief by Chimamanda Adichie. This is actually very recent, and the reason I wanted to read it is because the author wrote this during the pandemic and really explores very intimately and poignantly the death of her father due to kidney failure in the height of the pandemic, so like the summer of 2020. And I do think the pandemic will spawn some really great literature about this once-in-a-lifetime event. But the reason I loved this book, it's super tiny as you can see, is I felt that it was sort of like a diary and how personal and intimate it was. It really touched me because not only had she lost her father, but she wasn't able to grieve in a way that would have been normal due to the pandemic. So she had to communicate with her family via video call. She felt very isolated, and the text kind of jumps back and forth between the present, just excruciating pain of his loss, and more of a nostalgic pride at the man he was. I am very close to my dad, so this one really hit home for me. I can't imagine losing him so unexpectedly and so suddenly, and I thought it was very brave of Miss Adichie Chimamanda to really illuminate this very painful part of her life in a way that I felt could touch a lot of people. So I do recommend this one. It is a bit sad, but I think it illuminates not only her personal tragedy, but also the way the pandemic can just devastate so suddenly. So that is my first pick, is Notes on Grief, Chimamanda Adichie. Number 2. Another recent book, Swimming Back to Trout River by Linda Feng. I really liked this book. This one, I believe, came out in May, and it was really lauded in reviews. I really wanted to read something different. I was looking just for a good novel to bury into. And just as a really short premise, this story is about a girl named Junie in the 1980s who is dropped off at her paternal grandparents' house, and her parents, Momo and Cassia, are telling her they're going to bring her to America with them eventually. They're going there to kind of get settled. And it's very interesting because there's the backdrop of the Chinese Revolution as the parents, Momo and Cassia, kind of go back through how they met each other, their past, and it's just a delightful, poignant, interwoven tale of individual tragedy and how that connects to family tragedy. So for instance, Momo, the father, very loving, he is a deferred violinist. He loved the violin when he was younger, but due to the sort of society they were living in under the Chinese Revolution, the thought of pursuing an art form like the violin as opposed to something that would, be more amenable to that society at the time, wasn't something he could do. And so it talks about that, and the person who taught him the violin, this woman named Dawn, and how he shaped her. And then Cassia, on the other hand, is dealing with the grief of witnessing a tragic incident during the revolution and how she kind of carries that with her even into her relationship with her husband. And complicating things more is the fact that their daughter, Junie, is born without legs. And so there seems to be a lot going on, and usually with stories like this there's like a lot of plot, a lot going on, you can kind of feel like you get mixed up in it. But I think the author does such a beautiful job anchoring you in each of the characters and their journeys towards self-realization, and how they eventually interconnect in these very, important relationships, whether they become more isolated, whether they get to know each other more, what happens when they move to a place like America. So I thought it was a really beautiful book, actually. The prose is spare but very beautiful, and I believe the story and the way the author just sort of dives deep into her character's psychology and who they are as people was something that I really enjoyed. So I would definitely recommend this, Swimming Back to Trout River by Linda Feng. I enjoyed it. Number 3, another more recent one, but it is one of my favorite authors, Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. People who know me know I love this author. I think I've probably read everything she's written, from Interpreter of Maladies to The Lowland to The Namesake. I think she's a very gifted writer. She won the Pulitzer. And I was very excited to read this novel of hers specifically because, unlike her other novels, which focuses a lot on like the Indian American experience, the Indian immigrant experience, this one follows an unnamed woman narrator who is just living her life seemingly in an Italian city and kind of at this precipice of what to do with her life and how, the next step she's going to take as, this middle-aged person just kind of grasping for meaning and, what she really wants to do and what she wants as a person. And I think what I like most about this book is the fact that there's not a lot that happens. I think the reader has to contend with the fact that time is very, very heavy, and it can be slow going, but can also shape so much of who we are. So each chapter, they're super short. They're titled In August, in the train station, at the ticket counter. So she's in these different places doing, your day-to-day normal things, but she is also experiencing more of this existential kind of feeling or crisis of loneliness, of solitude. Her family's not near her. She's only had like a spate of love affairs. And so she's really trying to contend with all of that by herself. And I just really enjoyed the deep dive psychologically into what she was going through, and very impressed because apparently the author spent time in Italy and wrote this originally in Italian, which is super cool, and then translated it back. So as a side note, that was really cool for me to know. But I would recommend this. It is a bit slower. There's not any earth-shattering, plot twists, nothing like that, but definitely a meditation on time and life and what makes up a life, and the heaviness of solitude and isolation and what that can do to someone. So Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. Really enjoyed it. Number 4, we're going back a bit in time. I know this book came out a while ago, but The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin is one I read over the past couple of months. And I know it came out last year, I think right at the beginning of the pandemic. I think it was like March of 2020. And I'm not a sci-fi person. I think people who know me know that pretty well. I'd much rather read realistic fiction, but I very much respect N.K. Jemisin as a Black woman, really breaking, boundaries in the genre. And I live in New York, and so I feel like she described this as her love letter to New York. And the premise of this is 5 people or avatars who represent the 5 different boroughs of New York have to come together to defeat this enemy that is trying to prevent New York's birth into a thriving city. So what I loved about this was it was very concretely set in the city, so you would think it would be more realistic and definitely a departure from some of her earlier work. But what I liked was how she was able to concretize the spirit of the city itself through these 5 people. in the boroughs they represented. So Brooklyn is an MC and now works in public facing. Manhattan or Manning kind of comes from out of town with like amnesia and is kind of the leader of the group. Then you have Branca from the Bronx, who is an indigenous person working at a nonprofit. And I think all of these characters coming together just really shows her skill in not only navigating what the city is and what it means to a lot of people, but doing it in a way where you're just instantly sucked into the life and vibrancy of the city, and the threat against it of isolationism and polarization and fear of other, and all of these sort of larger societal comments kind of concretized and distilled into like a science fiction fantasy novel. So much respect to N.K. Jemisin for writing this. I believe this is the first in a trilogy, so I think she's coming out with more. I think there's definitely more story to be told, but I enjoyed it. I know I was late to the game reading it, but as I'm not a sci-fi person, I am pretty proud of myself for making it through a pretty hefty little book. But I would recommend it for anyone who, you don't have to be in New York. I feel like you get a sense of New York from reading it, but I would recommend it. So, last but certainly not least, this is real old. We're going back in time. Madame Bovary. It's so funny. I read a lot of books over the past few months, just gathering inspiration as I was doing the novel revisions, and I read a lot of more recent novels, the ones I just told you about, and others that have come out within the past couple of years. But sometimes I like to shake things up and read one of the classics that everyone, heralds as being, groundbreaking for its time. And I'd never read Madame Bovary, and so I felt, kind of pulled to read it and, see what it was all about. But the premise is exploring the life of this woman, Madame Bovary, Emma, who is married to this, he's not really a doctor, it's a special term in French that I'm not going to attempt to say, but their lives together while they're married, and her increasing sort of disillusionment with their marriage and relationship, and her desire to sort of find and experience this earth-shattering love and relationship that she feels she deserves, and her sort of failed attempts to do that. So I think back in the day, the 1850s, whenever this was written, it was, criticized for how it portrayed, a woman having an affair, oh my gosh, and all of this other sort of, moral arguments against it. But I think it's interesting because on a meta level, like, reading books written back then, of course, you can still find so many things kind of questionable, or with your present day eyes looking back and wondering, why he would write it this way, or, what sort of themes is he talking about. But if you think about it in a historical context, you can recognize how groundbreaking this was, and the fact that, one, it's focusing on a woman and her psychological state in a time where that was really not something anyone concerned themselves with, and what the relationship could be in a marriage and being unhappy in a marriage. So even if currently I wasn't blown away by the story, I think with stuff like this and other classics, Pride and Prejudice or War and Peace, Anna Karenina, I think you can appreciate what it meant for the historical context. And so I would say it was good. I appreciated it. There were a few books that, I read earlier, the ones I showed you, that I may have liked a bit more. But I think with these, you kind of appreciate them for what they did, even if today they may not necessarily blow you away. So that, those would be the 5 I would kind of recommend. And I'm always looking for new books. So if you guys have any suggestions of books you've read and absolutely loved, other books you want me to talk about. I'll definitely be going back to my monthly, one book reviews that I usually did, but since I took kind of a longer break, I wanted to give you all a deeper peek into what I was reading and what I was really enjoying. So again, always appreciate you all listening. I love talking about this stuff if you can't tell. And be sure to like and subscribe, as I will definitely be posting more frequently. Thanks so much. See you all soon.